Steve, there are topics as a skeptic where skeptics will have to talk about them forever.
Yeah.
Acupuncture is definitely one of those topics.
Yeah.
It's been around for a long time. A lot of people don't understand what's actually going on. You know, what they have an idea of what they think is happening, but that's not what's actually happening. And in the end, like homeopathy, it doesn't do anything. Doesn't benefit anybody in any way.
But as far as we could tell, I think that's a reasonable statement. So yeah, acupuncture has been gaining a lot of popularity in the West and even within mainstream medicine, despite the fact that it makes absolutely no sense.
Right,
And
like chakras would have to exist, I guess, in order for it to do what they say it does.
Well, it depends on how you define acupuncture, first of all, which I think we need to start with. So what I think, and a good tell that something, you know, is dodgy or pseudoscientific is that nobody really understands what it is. Like most people don't know what homeopathy actually is and what the claims that are made for it and how it's supposed to work. That's a huge red flag. The same is true of acupuncture. Because if you ask people what it is, I mean, most people will give you a basic definition. It's like sticking thin needles into acupuncture points. It's like, okay, does that work? Does sticking needles into acupuncture points work? And and then they say, again, the proponents then get all squirrely as soon as you start to ask like a very specific scientific question, because the fact is, the answer to that question is no. That even after decades and thousands of studies, researchers have not been able to demonstrate that it matters where you stick the needles, or that even sticking the needles matters at all. And the proponents are like just subtly sort of migrating over to redefining acupuncture as, well, acupuncture is part of this holistic intervention where we talk about lifestyle choices and all these other things. You know what I mean? It's like, so they're deliberately mixing it together with other interventions to dilute the fact that the actual sticking of the needles does nothing. But let's talk a little bit, to understand what I'm saying, let's talk a little bit about what acupuncture points are.
Right.
So the idea is that there are specific locations on the surface of the body where, you know, the energy, some kind of energy is flowing through these points.
Chakras.
Well, the chakras are different, actually. Chakras are Indian. This is more Chinese.
Okay.
So this is just acupuncture points. And the energy is qi, which also is the same word for blood, by the way. And ancient acupuncture was more bloodletting than anything else. The modern concept of acupuncture as these very thin needles, and you insert them under the skin to like a certain depth, and you're manipulating the qi energy, the life flow energy, is about 100 years old. That's not an ancient idea. If you go back prior to that, you know, first of all, they didn't even have the technology to make like the modern filiform acupuncture needle. They were lances, and they were sticking them in body cavities. They were, you know, this was nothing like what we think of today, like this sanitized version, you know, this modernized, retconned version of acupuncture that people think of as acupuncture. It's not ancient at all. Not only that, where did the acupuncture points come from? Now, originally, there were, how many acupuncture points do you think originally?
I would say maybe a dozen.
365.
Okay.
Do you know why there were 365 acupuncture
One
points?
for each day of the year.
One for each day of the year. You know why that is the case? Because it was basically astrology.
Yeah.
It was, in fact, the projection of like some kind of astrological calendar onto the human body. 365 days, one for every day of the year. It literally is astrology. Where were the acupuncture points? You know, it was just all made up pseudoscience. This is all just tradition. This is not based upon any scientific information, understanding of anatomy, understanding of physiology or any kind of function. They have no basis in reality. And of course, then they evolved over time. Now there's 2,000 acupuncture points, and there's many different traditions of acupuncture. There's auricular acupuncture where you just stick it in the ears. There's, you know, ones that you could do just in the hands. There's, you know, Korean acupuncture and Japanese and Chinese. They're all different. Now, typically, when science is examining actual reality, it doesn't matter where you're doing the research or where the studies are being done, they kind of converge on the same answer because that's the reality, right? Like Chinese doctors don't have a different concept of how the heart works than European doctors do. The heart is the heart. You know, there's a sort of a consilience of the scientific evidence.
You literally have to believe in magic
You have to believe in magic
in order to believe that acupuncture works.
But let's even not even let's table that for a minute. Let's just talk about the actual acupuncture points themselves. Do they even exist? So there's multiple different traditions with no agreement. Again, that's similar to astrology. That's not how science works, where everyone has their own tradition. There's no similarity at all, among the various traditions. But even if you look within a tradition and you ask different practitioners, where's this acupuncture point? Where's that acupuncture point? What does it do? And they've tried to do that to map them based upon the consensus of expert opinion about where the acupuncture points are. And the conclusion was that they don't exist. That if you try to map out even a single acupuncture point, you end up with this large area of possibility, that's huge, which means it could be anywhere.
So you mean one doctor or one practitioner will say, it's right here, and another will say, no, it's actually right here, and another will say it's over here.
Right, exactly. And then, and how are they determining that anyway? Because everyone's a little bit different.
Right.
What are they using to determine where is here? You know what I mean? Because are you using what surface features are you using to determine where exactly the needle is supposed to go, and how does that relate to any underlying anatomical structures or whatever?
Yeah, it's not like they're saying, we put this needle 3 millimeters above this nerve that every human has.
Right.
It literally isn't that. It's just there's an area.
It's a very vague notion, generally area where it might go. Also, you could say, well, what does it do? What would you use that for? And it's poetry. Again, it's like astrology. There's no scientific or physical basis for deciding that if you stick the needle here in your ear, your spleen will be affected. I mean, there's no connection there whatsoever. So there's no physical reality to acupuncture points. There's no internal validity, no agreement about where they are and what they do. And then when you look at the clinical trials, which I do, and I've done a lot of reviews, like especially within my own specialty of the clinical studies, like acupuncture for migraine, for example, you look at different studies of the same condition, low back pain or whatever it is, and then each study has its different assortment of acupuncture points that they're using. They're not even using the same points from study to study. And so how could you could say that acupuncture works when there's no replication, because every study is kind of its own thing.
Right.
That's because practitioners have different ideas about, and how do they determine when you're doing a study of acupuncture? How do you decide what acupuncture points to use for that study? It's whatever the 3 people who are doing the study decide to use. Like there's no reference or standard. It's really just opinion.
And then how do you know it even worked? Like, are you just saying to the patient, oh, my back doesn't hurt anymore? And that's the...
Yeah, so now you're getting to like the clinical evidence, right? And so here, it depends on how well controlled the study is. So there are some well-designed, well-controlled acupuncture studies, and there's a couple of mechanisms that they use to control for them. So you could have what's called verum acupuncture, true acupuncture. That means you have an acupuncturist who knows what they're doing, apparently, sticking acupuncture needles into the correct acupuncture points, which again have no basis in reality, but we take it even within the study itself. And then there's sham acupuncture, where they stick the needles in the wrong points, right? And then there's placebo acupuncture, where they don't even stick the needles. They just poke the skin with toothpicks. Now, you can double blind that, and people have developed these clever devices where it's basically, imagine like a thick straw that's opaque, so you can't see inside of it, and there's a plunger. And you depress the plunger or at the top or whatever, and either it sticks a needle into the skin or it pokes the skin with a toothpick. You don't know, as the acupuncturist, what's happening, and the patient can't tell the difference sensationally because it feels the same. You just feel a little prick either way. Either you're being stuck or you're being poked. You can't feel the difference. So it's double blind. And it works pretty well. Now, when you do those kind of comparisons where you're looking at blinded outcomes, do you feel better? Are you using less medication? Are you having more days where you're functional, whatever? And you compare verum acupuncture to placebo acupuncture to sham acupuncture. It turns out it doesn't matter where you stick the needles, and it doesn't matter if you stick the needles. It doesn't matter. But if you compare them to no acupuncture, they're all better than doing nothing, because that's unblinded, right? That's all placebo effect. But acupuncture say, well, that shows that acupuncture works. All kinds of acupuncture works. Even the fake acupuncture works. But of course, scientific, that's what they say.
Even the fake acupuncture works.
That's like saying even the placebo of my drug works, so my drug works. Like, no, that's not how science works. If the placebo version works as well as the real version, it doesn't work. That's how you interpret that. So when you look at all of the acupuncture research, the studies that are the best controlled, the best designed, they show there's no difference, no separation between the real acupuncture and the fake acupuncture. It doesn't matter where you stick the needles. It doesn't matter if you stick the needles. But a lot of studies are poorly designed. They're poorly blinded. They don't assess the blinding. So we don't know if patients knew that they were getting real acupuncture or not. They use electroacupuncture, which is a new variable they throw in there. We're going to shock you through the needle. It's like, yeah, that's a completely different intervention because that's basically transcutaneous or transepidermal nerve stimulation, TENS, right? That's a different treatment altogether. The fact that you're doing it through acupuncture needles is irrelevant. That's like injecting morphine through an acupuncture needle and saying, look, the acupuncture needle treats the pain. Or it's the morphine I injected through it. You know, so anyway.
So is there like supposed to be a transfer of chi energy through the needle in some way?
You know, it unblocks it, it affects the flow of chi or whatever. And then there are some, you know, modern proponents who are trying to say, well, forget about the whole chi thing, you know, even though that's supposedly the whole fundamental basis for acupuncture points. Maybe they accidentally hit upon a real physiological phenomenon and the whole chi thing was just is nonsense. So they've been searching for the real mechanism of acupuncture. But we'll first prove that it works before you find a mechanism for it. And what they find is that if you stick a needle through the skin, stuff happens, right? That's basically the level that they've gotten to. Meaning that if you, there's stuff, your body reacts to having a needle stuck through it. Right? And it reacts kind of in predictable ways. There's an inflammatory response. Of course there's an inflammatory response. Then there's an anti-inflammatory response because that's what happens after you have an inflammatory response. Then the anti-inflammatory things come in there to quelch it. That's a normal response to trauma. And so, and in fact, I just read one study that said they were saying we found the mechanism for acupuncture. It was in mice. And said sometimes it's pro-inflammatory and sometimes it's anti-inflammatory. It's like at the same time. It's like, or random crap is happening when you stick needles into mice.
Right.
And it doesn't prove that it's a mechanism for anything. It's just that, there's just local tissue reactions when you stick needles in there.
Yeah, but how is that
supposed to do anything?
Yeah, like, okay, so they're saying, and therefore my kidney is better now, or whatever ailment they're saying. Like, there's no connection.
That's the connection of what's acupuncture used for. Now, again, the savvy proponents are sticking with things like it's good for pain, maybe nausea, and it makes you feel better, right? These vague subjective outcomes, because that's where you get the most placebo effect. And also you could make hand-waving arguments about, well, there's counter-irritation, there's some anti-inflammatory thing happening, it relaxes the muscles or whatever. That's where there's something happening because you're physically manipulating, you know, by sticking a needle through the skin. But of course, they can't even prove that. They can't even show that there's anything beyond an elaborate placebo going on here. But this is the Trojan horse approach, right? Where they use these sort of semi-plausible claims about nausea and pain. But really, if you look at the acupuncture industry, what they're promoting is medical acupuncture. They say, but we could also use it to treat anxiety and addiction and infertility and whatever ails you. Like, they use it for anything. So how does the mechanism that works for pain supposed to also treat your infertility?
Exactly.
If it works for everything, it probably works for nothing. That's a good rule of thumb in medicine. If there is some treatment that when you look at it, it seems to work for everything, you're looking wrong. And that means your methods are flawed, because nothing works for everything, especially completely different things that have nothing in common with each other. So this is clearly documented in the acupuncture literature, absolutely clear that after thousands of studies and decades of research, it doesn't seem that acupuncture points exist. Doesn't seem like sticking needles in them does anything. No one can prove separation from just a ritualized placebo effect. But the proponents are relentless, and they just keep, dancing around the evidence and making and altering their claims and doing studies that are not well controlled and finding non-specific effects and saying that's how acupuncture works. And they're just promising, but we'll sort it out all in the future, But I've seen it work in my practice. So they're starting with the assumption that it works, and then they're trying to backfill sort of the justification for it works. But as a scientific question, does acupuncture work? Do acupuncture points exist? Is there a specific reproducible effect from sticking needles in acupuncture points? The answer is a clear no. You've had thousands of studies to prove that it works, and you can't do it. You're not going to do it now. I think the simplest explanation is it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
But it's now this self-sustaining wellness industry of treatment that is built on this complete house of cards that nobody wants to look at too closely because it all instantly collapses when you ask basic scientific questions. What are acupuncture points? How do we know where they are? It turns out we don't know what they are, and we don't know where they are because they don't exist.
Right. When you put it that way, Steve, now when you are talking about acupuncture in the future, like the only position that you should have is it's based on absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
It has never proven to do anything. So therefore, it's a meaningless treatment that nobody should pursue.
Right. But they make it part of this delicious breakfast, right? Or this nutritious breakfast. Remember those commercials?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, here's a pastry next to nutritious food, and it's part of this overall meal.
Right.
It's a completely unnecessary part of it, and it adds nothing to the nutritional value of the meal, but that's how they're selling it now.
Mm-hmm.
Acupuncture is now part of this holistic intervention where we're going to do some lifestyle coaching, and we're going to do some nutritional interventions, and you're going to lose weight, and we're going to do these other things, and then we'll look at that 6 months later, you're doing better than you were because of the acupuncture plus. It's all the plus. It has nothing to do with the acupuncture. And they're doing that because acupuncture can't stand on its own. Because if they could prove that there was a specific effect, they would have done it by now. But they can't do it because it doesn't have one. Wouldn't it be amazing if it did?
Yeah.
I mean, you could prove to me that it did. Sure, just show me the evidence.
Yeah, if they could prove it, I'm all in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have no incentive not to just prescribe it myself, even do it myself. I'll take a friggin' seminar and get reimbursed for doing nothing. I'd absolutely love to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I have no incentive against it whatsoever. It's not like there's any downside, to doing it, except for the fact that I don't think that it works. That's the only thing that would keep me from doing it. But think about how amazing it would be if hundreds of years ago, before we knew really anything about anatomy or physiology, that people figured out through just anecdotal blind observation that, this amazing relationship between specific locations in the body and some, health effect. Wow, how did they hit upon that?
Mm-hmm.
It's basically impossible that they figured all that out. Like, we didn't figure anything out before we started doing scientific studies. We thought that bloodletting people was a good idea. You know what I mean? We had no idea how things really, really worked. It would be an amazing coincidence, like a mind-blowing coincidence if they hit upon something.
It's like magic, right?
It would be like magic.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There would have to be some underlying mechanism built into the human body that can essentially cure any ailment that the body could have by disrupting the skin in this manner.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense that we evolved for that to happen. So therefore, you really they shouldn't back away from Qi. They have to lean into it.
Yeah, but
that's the only thing.
Unfortunately, Qi doesn't exist, right? So they can't. There's no reason to think that it exists.
But people who buy into this methodology would,
That's a harder sell, though, if you're trying to get into like academic medicine. And
I don't disagree, but that
say that it works by magic.
But that's the only thing that you could say that, like, in a weird kind of way, legitimizes it. It's magic, There's a life energy,
And there are people who believe it. That's how it works, But either way, they lose either way. Either you have to believe in non-existent magical energy, or you have to believe in some kind of physiological mechanism, which is then falsifiable, and we know doesn't exist because we've never found them or anything that could possibly underlie a mechanism for acupuncture. So the best you could say is that sticking needles in people has some kind of an effect, non-specific, localized, or whatever. It activates something somewhere, in terms of a counter irritation. So there may be some some non-specific local effect there, like getting a massage. Yeah, okay, whatever, it can release endorphins or do something like that. But that is a long way away from saying that it's actually a useful intervention, or that it could actually cure diseases, or help people be more healthy, or treat infertility or addiction or psychological things, or anything like that. It really is a complete magical house of cards when it comes to medicine. And it's amazing how much support it is gaining, really, through just deception. Again, it's like without really being completely forthcoming about what it is and how it's supposed to work.